for the last, 2 months, and what we knew about their roster situation going in, and basically what we've seen of Georgia's defense against everyone other than Alabama and Florida, and obviously State doesn't have that type of firepower. I thought a shutout was very much in play. I thought there was a decent chance Mississippi State might not score. And then they march down in the opening possession, and they almost get in the end zone, get held to a field goal, and I'm like, all right, well, that was probably, scripted plays right out of the gate. That's as good as it's going to get. And then they score a touchdown, and then they score another touchdown, and I'm thinking, what is going on? Unfortunately, my attention was divided between that and other games that I was actually paying more attention to. But so I didn't really see how they did it, but I was amazed when I saw the scores keep coming, because I could not figure out how the Mississippi State offense, and it's not like they went out and signed new players. It had to be the same players that have been playing all year. How did they move the ball on Georgia's defense? You'll have to explain that to me, because it was one of those things that it's hard for me to believe it because I didn't see it.
Yeah, 24-24, in the fourth quarter, Will Rogers, true freshman, picks them apart. He got the ball out of his hands, throughout the evening, and their receivers actually caught the ball and left a lot out on the field too. So I think it was encouraging as far as what happened, because like I said, even though Georgia may be struggling in some spots, they still got 4- and 5-star players all over the field, Brad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and of course, the big story, I think, for most people coming out of the game was that JT Daniels finally played for Georgia, and he looked pretty good. And, and then Kirby kind of indicated that, he's been available for a while, and they just chose not to go with him. And I think if you're a Georgia fan, you're like, well, what's that all about? But getting back to the Mississippi side of it, I think it bodes well for the Egg Bowl. The idea that, look, before last weekend, we're looking at Ole Miss and what they're doing offensively, and we're thinking, dude, they're gonna, this is going to be a lopsided game, because in college football today, even a good defense, can only do so much against a really good offense. And Mississippi State, to be quite honest, was looking like the worst offense in the conference. All the way up until Saturday. And so now at least there's a reason to hope that, that State can score with Ole Miss and make that game a little bit closer to what we hoped it would be back when they went out and they decided to hire Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin. It looked like, okay, this is a rivalry you can count on producing some really high scoring games for years to come. But this time last week, I was having my doubts about that, but maybe we'll end up getting that anyway.
Yeah, not sure if it'll be a really competitive game. Ole Miss has every opportunity to blow it open at some point. I don't know if it'll be early or late or whatnot, but you're right. There seems to be some life even with. And what did you think of, even if as you were just kind of monitoring the game, when you knew that it was 49 scholarship players, Brad? I've never heard of that at Power 5 level.
Well, and all credit to State for going out there and playing the game anyway. We know that the guidelines give them the option of not playing when they get down. I can't remember if it's 53 or below 53, but whatever. Either way, they were at that point where they could have made the decision not to play, and the SEC would have said that's fine. And they went out and did it anyway. I can think of other examples this year of teams that were below that threshold and they still went out and played. But those were teams that were about to play games in which they were expected to win. They didn't want a game removed from the schedule that was probably going to be a W, even with the depleted roster. And so they went out and played it, and they won it. There have not been very many cases this year of a team that knew it was probably going to take one on the chin and went out and played it anyway. And I think what that tells me is that, Mike Leach had seen some improvement in practice. With them not having played the previous weekend, I think he probably saw some stuff he liked, and he knew that the team needed to go out there and play against a good defense and really test itself and see how much progress they had made. And so I'm just guessing that was a lot of the thought process in playing anyway. It's It's not that they thought they had a great chance to win. They might have even been surprised at how close they came. But it was more that, like, look, here's a good chance to see how much progress we've made, and so let's go do it. Because we've seen a number of teams that have had multiple weeks off and the time in between games, and it's just so unusual. These kids are they spent all their lives playing football where, okay, maybe you do have an off week, one Saturday where you don't play every now and then. But this going 2 straight Saturdays without playing is just really strange for all of them. And it's difficult to adapt to, and especially in this environment right now where it's just so difficult to get motivated, especially if you're not playing for a championship anymore. You don't want to have too many Saturdays go by without playing. So I'm glad they played.
Me too.
Dabo wishes Mississippi State had been his opponent.
No doubt about that. Oh, Dabo. All right, Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio. He joins us on the Abita Pecan guest line. Tennessee and Auburn, Brad. Auburn's not good, but Tennessee can't get this thing going. And I'm starting to sense if they drop, 2 more games to A&M, and who'd you tell me, Blake? I mean, I know they play Vanderbilt, but on the way out, who does Tennessee play?
A&M in Florida.
A&M in Florida. So if they drop those games, Brad, I wonder
you would think they will. Yeah.
Yes, I do. I wonder if Fulmer will move off of Pruitt. Your thoughts?
So I can't remember if it was your show I talked about this last week. I know I was on a show last week where we discussed the Hugh Freeze factor. And obviously he's a guy that South Carolina may have on their short list. I really think it depends on, what Ray Tanner's role is in this and whether his own job is safe. But there's a good chance that South Carolina is going to be talking to Hugh Freeze. And, we mentioned how it's not just that everyone wants a coach who's proven himself on offense these days, because that's the formula for winning. You want someone who's going to have an explosive offense, and Freeze checks that box. But the other thing that is important to some teams in the SEC is that Freeze has shown that he can beat Alabama. And while, it was, what was that, 5 and 6 years ago when he did it, there just aren't that many coaches who have beaten Nick Saban. And you got a guy here who's done it twice. For South Carolina, that's not that big of a deal because they don't play Alabama every year. They rarely play them. And they're more concerned with, okay, let's be able to beat, Tennessee or Georgia or Florida every now and then. That's kind of the mark of success at South Carolina. Whereas for Tennessee, you want a guy who can beat Alabama. I mean, that means a ton to Tennessee. And so I think if Fulmer thinks that he has a chance to get Hugh Freeze, and if he would want Freeze, I have no idea what he thinks of him, what their relationship is, stuff like that. But if he believes that, okay, I can get him if I act now, but if I wait one more year, he's going to be gone and he's going to be somewhere else in the league, then, and then I'm having to coach against him or, have my team play against him. I think that could light a fire under Fulmer to do it. So, look, at the end of the day, Jeremy Pruitt is an Alabama guy coaching at Tennessee. And as long as you're winning, it works for the Tennessee fans. But when you're struggling, I think Pruitt was always going to have a shorter leash than most coaches there because of his Alabama connections. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's a long way to answer your question. If it ends poorly for Tennessee this year, given the way that everything's gone in the last few weeks, that Fulmer decides to make a move, and especially if he does it just for the purpose of trying to get Hugh Freeze.
So the former DCs under Saban, one's already gone. Pruitt could be on the ropes. Can you imagine if Kirby Smart would have slipped up and lost to a Mississippi State team with 49 scholarship players?
Anywhere, though. Yeah, I know. He wouldn't have lost his job over it, but it would have been more embarrassing than losing to South Carolina last year. Now, the difference was last year with South Carolina, Georgia was undefeated going into that game, and it seemed to be a major blow to their playoff hopes. And I guess ultimately it It was until they ended up losing at LSU, getting blown out anyway. It didn't matter. But yeah, I think because the playoff situation, even the SEC East, was pretty much already decided, it wouldn't have felt as bad in some ways, but I think in other ways it would have been an even worse loss given what State had done in the weeks leading up.
All right, A&M hasn't played in a couple of weeks. LSU,
yeah, they're one of those teams that we just talked about.
There you go.
You don't want to be in that position, yeah.
Right? Kind of that rhythm and tempo that you were talking about. That's why it's a militaristic sport.
And by the way, A&M. I mean, for the first time under Jimbo, I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago, right after the South Carolina game. I've been a big critic of Jimbo, but they finally were starting to look like, a top 5 caliber team the last couple of games prior to having to take this break. So this is not, if there's anyone who didn't want to have to take a break, it was A&M.
And LSU just survives Arkansas after being a 42-point favorite last year. Man, they've got a lot of work to do too, Brad.
Oh, LSU? Yeah. That was you used the right word, survive. And that's really all it was about. That was just a game that LSU had to win just to kind of save some face. If the SEC rearranges the schedule and forces them to play, all of the teams that are supposed to be remaining on their schedule. In other words, if they have to play A&M, Florida, and Alabama, if they hit that trifecta, then they're going to lose 3 more, and they're going to finish with a losing record. And by the way, would be the first defending national champ to have a losing overall record since 1943, which is not what you're gunning for. But I think, by the way, here's another one.
That's incredible.
I was just looking at LSU's defense. They are currently 3rd to last in the FBS in yards allowed per pass attempt. Okay, which is about the best thing you can come up with as far as a standard stat that most people can find in a box score. That it's a pretty good measure of efficiency, either passing or defending the pass. They're 3rd to last in the nation in yards per pass attempt allowed, but they have yet to play any of the top 3 passing teams in the SEC, and all 3 of them are left on their schedule. And like I said, if the SEC gets the schedule back together, A&M is not a bad passing team who they have this week, but their final 3 games will be against the 3 best passing teams in the league: Ole Miss, Florida, and Alabama. So, they have a chance to not only finish with a losing record, but in the process, maybe put up the worst pass defense numbers in the history of the SEC. And this is, they consider themselves DBU, as you know. So, this is embarrassing stuff for LSU. And I don't know what kind of chance they have of winning this week. Whatever chance they have, it's only because of A&M having not played in 2 weeks and, probably will be rusty out of the gate. But, this is for LSU, it's all about damage control over the final month and just try to get embarrassed as little as possible on the way out.
Brad Edwards joins us on the Beta Pecan guest line. Blake, you got a question for Brad Edwards?
Yes, twofold, Brad. So I love coaching carousel talk because it's always theoretical. You never know who's going to go where. It's always just fun to me. I love coaching changes. Ed Orgeron is one of those guys that we've talked about all the time, like, oh, when's he going to get fired, all this craziness. And last year, the Joe Brady thing, you could argue without Joe Brady, Burrow is just Jarrett Stidham at LSU. Like, it's insane what happened last year. But then you come to this year, and he hires Bo Pelini, stands by it, says before the season they're the best defense that they've ever had at LSU. They are 111th with 44 plays of over 20 yards given up in 6 games. They are 116th with 23 30-plus yard plays. They're 124th in the country with 16 40-yard plays, and they are worse, dead last in the country, with 9 50-plus yard plays. Ed Orgeron has to fire Bo Pelini, obviously, but given the evolution of offense, could we see Ed Orgeron gone in less than 3 years after winning a national title?
Oh, yeah, less than 3 years. I thought you were going to go for this year. And I was
thinking
no. That I was going to say that to me seems. Even I mean, Chiswick made it 2 years after winning the national title at Auburn. I tell you what, I mean, LSU right now, if you guys follow recruiting at all, they are, I want to say top 5. I think they're like 4 or 5 in the class rankings, typical LSU class. But I want to say that they are considered the favorite to land like 3 of the top 4 uncommitted prospects left in the country. And it's crazy to think about. I mean, on one hand, it's not, because it's LSU, and they won the national championship last year, and it's obviously a great place to play and all that stuff. But when you look at what a dumpster fire this season has been, and now all of the stuff that came out in the USA Today report last week, on top of it, the thought that they could kind of land on their feet through all this by bringing in a recruiting class that has a chance to be number 1 in the country, it's kind of crazy. And I think it speaks to just what the divide is between the haves and the have-nots.
No doubt.
In that, and that when you're a have, like there's only so many places that those players are willing to go. And so you're just going to kind of stumble into great talent year after year, and especially if you're in Louisiana. So he would have to be, I would just say he'd have to be pretty incompetent to lose his job because of wins and losses, or too many losses, given the amount of talent he's going to continue to have. So this obviously was a weird year with not just COVID and all that, but I mean, the guys they lost from last season, players and coaches off of last year's team, I don't think any team in college football history has ever had to replace as much talent, both on the field and on the sideline, as what LSU was dealing with coming into this year. So you do have to give Coach O a pass on that front. There's still no excuse for them being as bad as they are. But we'll see. Next year will be a big year for him, because LSU is not going to hesitate to make a move if it looks like he's not ever going to get them there to a national championship again.
Brad Edwards on the Out of Bounds show. Brad, you mentioned LSU still recruiting at a high level. They're ranked 3rd right now, and they're the favorite on some of the top ranked players that are still left. Taking that one step further, you look at Michigan is at number 9 and Tennessee is at 11, and they haven't showed anything. I mean, and it just goes to show you players are only going to go so many places, and if you get after it in recruiting, you're I mean, think about Brad. Michigan's 9, Tennessee's 11, and neither coach has proven that they're going to get it done at a super fun high level like some of the other programs that you and I discuss on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I think the difference with LSU and the other two you just mentioned is that Coach O, like I said, unless something blows up with his off-field stuff, he's going to be back next year. You can't say the same thing right now for Jeremy Pruitt, that he's definitely going to be back. And in the case of Jim Harbaugh, at this point, you have to doubt that he's going to be back. I mean, it would seem more unlikely that he will be back than that he won't. So if you're a player, now I mean, some of these guys are just like, hey, Michigan's still Michigan, so they'll get a good coach to replace him, so that's fine. I'll just stay here. I'm sure there are guys who will jump ship. The other thing that's weird with all this, Tennessee had that run back in the spring when they were just raking in a whole lot of the guys who have that class ranked where it is came in a span of, I don't know, it was about 3 weeks, after COVID had hit and all that. And so one thing that's going to be really interesting to keep an eye on is how many decommits are we going to have as we, get close to the early signing date? Because a whole lot of these kids around the country have not even made a visit. Okay, I realize a lot of them have taken unofficial visits. There have been no official visits allowed for a long time now. But some of these kids have never even been to the campus that they've committed to, and they're not going to have a chance to go. And so I don't know. Like I would just think if you haven't been there and you don't know that much about it, it's a lot easier to kind of bail when the season isn't going that well for the team and you're uncertain about the coach's future and all that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee's and Michigan's classes don't get crushed here prior to the early signing period. Maybe they won't, but given everything that's in play with this year and how many of those recruits have not been on official visits, I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers don't get worse.
Ooh, and who would take advantage? I think Kiffin, because they're in the 50s, which surprises me, 40s. So Kiffin could pick up some 4-stars from a Tennessee, Michigan type class, and it may be a few others.
You're looking at
some of the powers are already full, though, Brad.
You're right, and that's the point I was going to make. Is that you look at the top ranked classes, like they're basically down to like their final 2 or 3 players, and they're choosing from the cream of the crop. And that's not to say that they might not reverse course if they found out that a top 50 player from Tennessee or Michigan is reconsidering. But yeah, for the most part, those other teams are locked in. And so I think you're right. It's kind of that second tier of recruiters would be the ones that would benefit the most if that happens.
Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio on the Abita Pecan guest line. Brad, thank you, buddy. We wish you and your family a happy Thanksgiving, my man.
You got it. Same to you and all the good people in Mississippi.
Take care. See you, dude. Brad Edwards on ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Don't forget that the podcast will be available to you. The Apple Podcast. Search the Out of Bounds Show. Spotify. Podbean. It's on the Out of Bounds radio app. If you miss Tom Luganbill, Matt Wyatt, or Brad Edwards, hit Apple Podcast and search the Out of Bounds Show. We'll be here Tuesday and Wednesday, too, before taking off for Thanksgiving. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.